I've been trying to figure out where I wanted to go with the channel. And I settled on doing more content that revolved around storytelling and fiction, since I want to dedicate more time to writing and my own fiction. So I want to garner some semblance of a community that is already kind of interested inside of a surrounding field, so that maybe I can have a little bit of support in my own fictional endeavors. Anyway, this is a new series I'm beginning, Tales from Apocrypha, that will focus on telling stories from all around the world, from various authors and time periods, as well as those that are more mythological, as well as, well, fictive in nature. It's gonna be a lot of fun, I hope. And I hope that you guys enjoy the concept of this seeker of Apocrypha just going about and bringing you stories from different dimensions and telling them to you. So, as always, thank you for popping in and joining me tonight as I bring you a story from my own collection in Apocrypha. From the books that lay in the shelves of this massive expanse of both well-known, obscure, and forgotten knowledge, I will pluck you a tale. This story comes from a rural New England town, located in Vermont, Stowe. This story is a retelling by S.E. Slosser in the book Spooky New England, Tales of Hauntings, Strange Happenings, and Other Local Lore. Emily's Bridge, from Stowe, Vermont. No one remembers Emily now. At least, not the Emily I knew. Emily lived on the farm next door to mine, just outside of Stowe. She was a few years older than I, but we were friends anyway. We'd walk home from school together when we were younger. Later, when Emily was too old for school, she would come over and show me new ways to do my hair and talk about clothes and bows. Something I really appreciated, what with me living with 3 older brothers and having a mother and father in heaven. Of course, I was always welcome to Emily's house. He sort of adopted me. Poor, parentless Judith from next door. Emily's mother rather pampered me, and her father would give me sweets. Emily's family was well-to-do, and they were very proud of their beautiful only daughter. Truthfully, Emily was a bit spoiled and used to having her own way. I was pretty easygoing back then, and I didn't mind when she bossed me around. Emily had a whole string of suitors coming by regularly, but she didn't seem to have a preference for any of them. Until Peter came to Stowe for an extended visit with his cousins. Peter was the ne'er-do-well son of a miller. He was tall, handsome, and fascinating, and he quickly joined the crowd of young men who waited upon Emily's fancy. Emily's family did not approve of Peter, but they never actually forbade him to see her. I knew right away that Emily had fallen for him. She turned a pretty pink color when she saw him coming, and she had a way of studying him through her long eyelashes that made me certain her other young suitors were out of the running. Once, on my way home, I spotted them leaning against a tree behind the barn, kissing. They never noticed me at all, though my path took me right past them. Emily came over one afternoon to help me dress for a recital at school. She braided my hair and told me all about how wonderful Peter was. She was so happy. She seemed to glow as she tweaked the end of my braid and told me I was one of the attendants at her wedding. I was more pragmatic in nature and said cautiously, "What do your parents think of him? He doesn't have the best reputation, you know." Emily just laughed. "They will love him, just as I do," she said. I wasn't so sure. Emily's father usually frowned when he saw Peter enter the parlor, and her mother had a worried look these days that I had never seen before. "I'm going to tell them tonight," Emily said. "Peter wanted to be there, but I thought it was best if I broke the news first." Smart Peter, I thought, but did not say so aloud. "Why the rush?" I asked instead. "You've only known each other for a few weeks." "Well," Emily blushed a bit. "Can you keep a secret?" Remembering the scene behind the barn, I knew at once what it was. "You're in the family way," I said. Emily nodded. "Peter wants to get married right away. So do I." She tugged the end of my braid once again. "Wish me luck," she said, and went down the stairs and back to our home. On our way to the recital, my brothers and I passed Emily's house. Even from the road, we could hear her father yelling. Things were not going well for Emily, I thought. I wondered if she was going to tell them about the baby. "Emily's pa sure is mad about something," said my eldest brother Tim, who was escorting us to the recital. Tim had taken over the farm and the raising of us children after our pa died. He hurried us past Emily's house as quickly as he could. "I wonder if it has anything to do with that Peter fellow who's been beauing Emily lately. He's supposed to be a bad egg. I hear he came here to visit his cousins, 'cause he got some girl in the family way back home, and then refused to marry her. Her family made it too hot for him to stay in town, so he made a run for it. Hope Emily's alright." Uh-oh. I was getting ready for bed after my recital when a soft tap sounded on my door. Emily slipped in. She was wearing her traveling cloak and carrying a small bag. "I just came to say goodbye," she said quietly. "You probably heard what Papa said tonight." I nodded. "I think the whole town heard," she said with a sigh. "Well, I sent young Jimmy from the store with a note to Peter telling him what Papa said, and Peter sent me a note back saying to meet him tonight. We're going away to be married." Remembering the other girl, I said, "Emily, don't. Peter doesn't have the best reputation. Tim said there was another girl back home. I know all about it." She interrupted. "Peter explained the whole thing. Her beau got her in the family way, and when he skipped town, she blamed Peter instead, hoping that her parents could force him to marry her. This is a completely different situation." "Did you tell your parents you were in the family way?" I asked. "Of course not." Emily was shocked. "Papa would have killed Peter. Of course, Papa is going to disown me when he learns I eloped with Peter, but I don't care. Papa and Mama don't know anything about being in love." I argued quietly with her for several more moments, but nothing I said swayed her decision. Finally, she tweaked my braid, kissed me on the cheek, and slipped away. I sat for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Perhaps Peter was serious about Emily, and intended to do the right thing. Or perhaps he would skip town, and Emily would be forced to go back home and tell her family her predicament. Some of her other beaux were so smitten with her that her family could easily find her husband and hush the whole thing up. I gave up trying to reason it out and went to talk to Tim. He was just about the smartest man in the world, and he would know what to do. Tim heard me out, and then said, "I know for a fact that Peter was the one that got that girl in trouble. We'd better go talk to Emily's folks." Emily's pa was not happy to be wakened from a sound sleep. He was even more unhappy when he heard my story and saw for himself that Emily was gone. I could not tell him where Peter had arranged to meet Emily, since I did not know myself. "Well, we'll try to keep this quiet," he said finally. "Perhaps we can muddle through without a scandal." He looked suddenly old and weary. My brothers and Emily's father and uncle spent most of the night searching for her. It was dawn, and I was milking the cows before breakfast when Tim came and told me Emily had hung herself from the rafters of the Goldbrook Bridge. Peter had left her a note saying he would not marry her. They found it clutched in her hand when they cut her down. I leaned my head against the cow's side and cried like a baby. It was about a month later that I first heard strange reports about the Goldbrook Bridge being haunted. A visitor to Stowe stood in the center of town, claiming that something had clawed his horse and carriage when he was crossing the covered bridge the night before. He had, he declared, heard a woman laughing angrily just before it happened. He offered to show the scratches on his new carriage for any skeptics. Tim went right over and felt the carriage. Scratches were definitely there. Soon others reported that they too heard a sound of a woman's voice as they crossed the bridge. More carriages and horses were clawed. Strange lights would appear and disappear all around the bridge after dark. People began saying Emily's ghost was haunting the bridge. I was very upset the first time I heard this. The Emily I knew would never hurt anyone. But of course, the Emily I knew was the young girl running away to meet her soulmate, not the young girl who was jilted by her lover and had hung herself in despair. Then a school friend of mine came to pass one morning, looking pale and upset. He and his pa had been driving across the bridge the night before and were stopped by a pale figure that glowed in the darkness. It had taken all his father's strength to keep the terrified horses from bolting. The ghost had circled the cart slowly, then gripped the side next to my school friend and shook the carriage savagely. My friend's pa lost his hold on the horses and they bolted out, crossed the bridge, and ran so hard and fast that it took his pa several miles of frantic pulling to bring them to a halt. The ghostly figure, my friend said, glancing at me and then away, looked like Emily. At dusk, I walked down to the covered bridge. I told Tim where I was going and why, and he promised to come look for me if I wasn't back in an hour. I shivered as I walked into the darkness of the covered bridge. The sound of the babbling brook filled my ears. It took a few moments for my eyes to adjust to the dim light. I leaned back against a wall and said quietly, "Emily?" All I could hear was the rushing water below the bridge. "Emily, I'm so sorry about Peter." The tears were trickling down my cheeks. "I tried to tell you about Peter. If only you had listened. I didn't want you to die." I was sobbing now, my hand over my mouth. I drew in a few gasping breaths and continued. "I didn't get to you quick enough. I should have hurried over and made you stop. Please don't be angry with me." I buried my face into my hands, overcome with guilt and pain, and somebody tugged on my braid. I stopped crying, shocked. I looked up and saw Emily standing beside me. She turned towards the entrance of the bridge, and her face hardened. She clenched her fist and shook it. Then she looked back at me, and her face softened. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, just as she had done the night she died. I felt the faintest prickling on my skin where her lips touched me. Then she was gone. Tim came onto the bridge and took me by the hand. I wiped away my tears and said, "Do you think she will keep haunting the bridge?" "Probably," said Tim. "Emily has a lot of anger to work out. But she's not mad at you. I wish you'd told me what you told Emily. It would have set you straight. You did everything right that night. No one could have done better. Even Emily thinks so. She just proved it." The bridge echoed with a familiar chuckle. And someone tugged at my braid again. "Goodbye, Emily," I said. Tim and I went home. There are a lot of iterations of this particular story. On the sign just outside of Emily's bridge, it reads that there are 2 possible ways that she could have died. One claims that she was thrown off of a carriage while fleeing to meet her suitor, and the other says she threw herself off of it voluntarily after her suitor had chosen someone over her. The bridge itself is relatively unremarkable, one of many covered bridges in New England, but it is one of the most infamous here. And often, like my friends and I have, young ones with similar stories sometimes go there, maybe to relate to Emily, or out of sheer curiosity of whether or not the myth is true. I hope you enjoyed the story for tonight. Thank you all for joining me on this fine evening, and I hope to see you again in the future. As always, I am Apocrypha, and I will see you on the other side. Good night, Seekers.